Well, John, I know you're heading south for the PowerNet Tour of Southland yet again, and cycling, professional cycling in particular, needs some good news after the revelations about Lance Armstrong.
There's plenty of good news out there about the sport. The number of kids that we're turning out in New Zealand, drug-free, clean. This is good. Bad news? No, no. I think it's actually good news. It means at long last we're cleaning house and we're getting rid of the big sacred idols where, it's like throwing all those things that we bowed down to in the past in the Church of Cycling and saying, whoa, they were false gods. Let's get rid of them and let's bring in the nice, clean young folk that have been that have been coming to the top in the last few years and celebrate now a new beginning.
With Armstrong himself, I mean, I had my suspicions for a long time, and I'm not being wise after the event, but what was your personal feeling about his achievements and what they were shrouded in?
Yeah, I got a whisper many years ago that he was a bully, and he bullied people in his team into joining the drug program, and if they didn't, it was goodbye. He's just, not, in a word, not a nice person. He's one of those people that there were very much two sides to the man. Obviously, his cancer issues, his cancer charities, but then within the sport, his ruthlessness and his bullying tactics amongst his teammates. He's just a very complex human being. How history will judge him, that's for someone else to decide, but I think it's incredibly sad. I'm just glad it's all over, quite frankly. If there's ever any doubt, just have a look at the people he beat to win the Tour. And, there was one year in particular where he beat Marco Pantani, who later died of a drug overdose, and Jan Ullrich, who was a convicted doper. And he beat those guys, and they were high as kites when they were racing. So yeah, you just can't do that. And the fact that these days now, the times are getting slower in the Tour de France, they're taking longer to climb the hills, and you haven't got one bloke that's coming out each day and winning everything. You've got to pick your stages and manage your body better because you just don't have the additives that you once had.
Is it going to be an overnight clean out, though? Because, I mean, already they've said they can't give the second place guys the award because they don't know who's on and who's off. So how do we go from where we are now to proper clean cycling?
Yeah, well, baseball's done that, haven't they? They talk about the doping era of baseball and now the clean era. And you'll find that in baseball, they're not making, there aren't the home runs being generated that they used to be. And now we've got to do this in cycling. We've just got to say, okay, well, this is the clean time. And, it's all good, Tom. It really is. I'm quite relieved. And as far as some of the old hands, guys like David Miller and Ivan Basso, they came out. They did their time. They've got back on their bikes and they're racing clean. And you can tell they're racing clean because they're not doing as well as they used to. No, it's all good. And see what it means. We've got thousands of kids up and down this country, from Invercargill to Kaitaia racing. And I would hate to have to go to a parent of one of these kids and say, well, look, maybe it's not such a good idea. Little Jimmy or little Janet, she's going well. But if you want to go really well, you're going to have to go overseas. And, of course, when you get overseas, you're going to have to get on the juice. You can't say that to a parent. You can't commit. It's just not on. But now we can say, this is the king of sports. Get on a bike, and your ability will take you as far as it can. And if you have a look at the pro peloton now, there are more and more people from outside of Europe involved in the sport. I think, goodness, we've got about 8 New Zealanders riding the World Tour now, with Tom Scully getting his jersey and George Bennett and so on and so forth. So we've got guys coming, goodness knows how many Australians. There's riders from Japan, China, Argentina. So that was just unheard of as much as 5 years ago. You'd get the odd one or two. But mostly it was North Americans and Europeans, and they dominated the sport. I can remember Brian Fowler, who won the Tour of Southland 8 times, telling us that when he was an amateur, we don't have amateurs anymore, but when they had the amateur ranks, he raced in an event called the Grand Prix des Nations, and he won it in France. And he was offered a contract with ACBB, which is the biggest amateur club in those days, and it was the feeder team for the Peugeot Pro team. And Brian's never really discussed why he didn't pursue it. But when he was offered a pro contract, he said no. And he just came home and he rode the Olympics and he rode Tour of Southlands and he rode other amateur races around the world. And he was quite happy with that, and he was dominant in that event, in that section. And he was in an event a couple of years later where there were amateurs and pros. I think this was after 95, when they made it all open and they deleted the amateurs. And some of the blokes he'd been murdering on the bike as an amateur were now killing him and was streets ahead of him and made him look silly. And yet he was still the best at that grade. So something changed, something was different. And the difference, of course, as we know now, is doping. So we've been able to clean it out of the sport gradually, drag ourselves kicking and screaming into the 21st century. And the portents are good. I think, the sport's in good heart, and I think we'll go forward honestly and cleanly. And we can look at the Tour de France in years, in the coming years and say, yep, just by their very performance, and that's something that those of us that know the sport, the last 2 years, particularly in the Tour de France, we've been able to say, yep, it's drug-free, because we haven't had one rider dominating day after day after day in the mountains and then in the time trials.
I think, too, industry is taking the right stance, because they said it was always about money. Well, Rabobank have pulled out as a sponsor, and, of course, Nike here. So if they take a strong stand, that excuse goes out the window, and people do it because they love it, which is, the real reason you take part in that sport. I
met a couple of Dutch riders in Wellington a few years ago, and I was talking to them about this very subject, about the money and the doping and all the rest of it. And these two blokes, they just loved cycling, and they would go from country to country following the sun, just riding a bike race like a couple of surfy bums, except they had their bikes and they went wherever the sun shone and just enjoyed bike racing, and one a bit here and one a bit there. And I said to them, what's going on? And they said, well, what's happened in Europe and North America is you've got a generation of kids that all they want is to be rich and famous, and they don't care how they get there, and they want it now. And if someone comes along and says, if you take this, you will be rich and famous, they will do it. And they don't care if they die when they're 30. They will do anything they can to be rich and famous, and that's the whole end game. Well, let's hope that we've expunged that attitude from the sport and leave it in Hollywood where it belongs, because we just don't need that sort of thing. And let's also remember, Tom, that cycling isn't the only sport that's been tainted by this. You only have to look at athletics and what happened at the London Games with the shot put and so on and so forth. There are always people out there that will cheat for the glory.
All right, let's finish on a positive note, though. Not talking positive with drugs, of course, but the Tour of South, the Pounded Tour of Southland next week. How much are you looking forward to this yet again?
Tremendously. This is great. I was just saying how many World Tour riders we've got now, how many pros we've got, how many second-tier continental pros we've got, how many great up-and-coming bike riders we've got. It's very, very hard to pick a winner for this year's Tour of Southland. I sat down and had a look at the entries so far, and I don't know, it's going to be a very, very tough race. Of course, it's up to you people down there to start getting your spirit fingers out and doing something about the weather, although I see the forecast for Saturday and Sunday is good. I don't know what's going to happen after that. The weather obviously will play its part, as it always does on the tour, but I'm looking forward to a really good race, and if I had to pick a winner this far out, I'd look at Paddy Bevan. He's bringing down his whole Bissell Pro team from the United States. Jeremy Venn will be with him, and 4 of the American boys. And I think Paddy Bevan, he's from Taupo. I reckon he might be looking like a winner this year.